A very good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the RSIS webinar, Where is U.S. Middle East Policy Headed by Dr. Adam Garfinkle. My name is Adrian Ang. I am Research Fellow and Coordinator of the United States Program at the Institute of Defense and Strategic Studies at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, Nanyang Technological University, Singapore. Before I formally introduce our speaker this morning, just a little housekeeping, right? The event is being recorded. Dr. Garfinkle will be speaking for about 45 minutes, and then we will open the session to Q&A. Please use the Q&A function on Zoom to submit your questions. And now, without further ado, let me introduce our speaker this morning, Dr. Adam Garfinkle, who was the founding editor of The American Interest and also Distinguished Visiting Fellow at RSIS from 2019 to 2021. So without further ado, I will turn it over to you, Adam.
Thank you, Adrian. It's nice to be back in this format again. It's been a couple of months. A lot's happened. We're living at a time of accelerated experience in the United States and in other parts of the world. Never a dull moment, really, lately. Plenty to think about and worry about. Every once in a while, there's something to smile about. You lose your sense of humor in times like this, you're in trouble. I'm going to talk about the Middle East. It's morning in Singapore. I'm 12 time zones behind, so it's late here, and I'm going to hit the hay as soon as this is completed. But we're going to talk about the Middle East, and I want to let you know I've got my NTU shirt on. If you can see it, so I'm still a proud alumnus of the RSIS program and of the of NTU as a university, and I hope to get back to Singapore one of these days. I don't know. It's been quite a while. That would be fun to do, and then maybe we could meet in the same room, and that would be nice too, instead of trying to do it via this technology. Everybody knows that there's a war going on right now. It started on Friday between Israel and Iran. Israel attacked Iran, and there's a great temptation to succumb to presentism and to talk just about the most recent events. And we can do that. We will do that in due course, mostly during the Q&A. But I don't want to talk about that right now. I want to talk about what I plan to talk about before Friday. Let me start by just letting you know that when I originally wrote up my little summary or blurb and tried to think of a title for what I wanted to say, it was a little bit different than the way it came across on the announcement. And I defer to the folks in Singapore to know their audience best. But what I wanted to call it, and what I want to talk about really is not so much where is U.S. Middle East policy going, but where did it go? What happened to it? The traditional Middle East policy of the United States that we've seen since the end of the Second World War and through the Cold War and through the end of the Cold War, a lot of that policy has simply not changed but disappeared. It's been replaced by something very discontinuous, for the most part, from anything that those of us who've been in this field, in academia and in the government, have experienced. And this is not normal. And I want to stress that what's going on in the United States in terms of its domestic political culture is not normal. And the foreign policy adjunct to these changes in U.S. domestic political culture are not normal, along with the domestic not normal. And it's hard for people, a lot of people in the United States, and I think even harder for people abroad, to really appreciate just how discontinuous the Trump 2.0 administration has been, even from the Trump 1.0 administration, from the first term. It is dramatically different from anything that has gone before. And different analysts have tried to sum it up, tried to describe it in a number of ways. But and we could spend a long time trying to do that. But I want to be blunt about it because I want to try to combat the rubber band effect that I think is going on. I mean, people see a lot of these strange things happen. For example, we have people now in the United States working for the Department of Homeland Security, the so-called ICE group, right? running around, picking people off the streets without due process, wearing masks. Where in the world do government agents who don't have a uniform or a badge and who are wearing masks, where do they snatch people off the street and throw them into jails or deport them to prisons in Salvador? Where in what democratic country, in what still democratic country, do things like that happen? And that's just in one example of many of the very, very strange things that demonstrates just how discontinuous and how not normal what has been going on really is. Um, how to describe um, how to describe the administration's basic attitude toward the presidency and toward the government, um, and and how that affects thought about U.S. foreign policy, and then how it specifically affects U.S. policy in the Middle East. Well, uh, it's one of the ways to put it is that President Trump and the people he has surrounded himself with, and the constituencies, the pieces of the very unusual coalition that elected him, um, I would not describe them as anti-democratic or anti-liberal. I would describe them as pre-democratic and pre-liberal. The attitudes they have about executive power, for example, resemble patrimonialism. That's why the rallies against the Trump administration were called No King demonstrations, because he's trying to act like a king. He's trying to monopolize political power in the executive branch, and he's trying to do it in defiance or skidding along the very edges of the law. And uh, it's not clear yet where this attempt will end, but there are many aspects of not totalitarianism but authoritarianism creeping into body language and things people say in the administration. And I think the right term for it is patrimonialism. It's an attitude where the leader and those who are associated with him treat the government, treat treat civil society as a kind of property, and for personal use, like a king, like a monarch in pre-enlightenment and pre-modern times. Um, uh, some people have described what happened on November 5th last year. I've described it as a double coup in a way. Uh, the first coup was the populist coup, the plurality that got Trump elected, free and fairly elected a second time, first time in 2016, and the most recent time on November 5th of last year. And I'm being a little facetious in calling it a coup because it was a democratic election and he won fair and square. But I want to read, and this isn't the first time in history we have seen a democratic demos uh, push their own country in a direction away from vox populi, away from democracy. Which using democracy not to stabilize and expand and operate it, but actually using the franchise, using the democratic franchise to undermine the attitudes that sustain a democracy. And one of the more, I like to use literature. Sometimes I think that fiction writers can express truths about human realities, including social and political realities, better than nonfiction. So Umberto Eco, famous Italian writer, passed away, I think, in 2016, wrote some great novels. Many of you must be familiar with some of them. The Name of the Rose, Foucault's Pendulum, just wonderful books. He wrote a book called The Prague Cemetery, I think in 2011, or I forget the date. But in the book, he does, and by the way, in this book, I dropped my paper with a quote. In this book, every one of the characters in the book, except the lead character, is an actual historical figure. So it's like historical fiction. So at one point in the book, he puts these words in the mouth of his character, whose name is Joly, who is speaking of Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, 1852, transformation of France's short-lived Second Republic. Second Republic arose as a result of the revolutions of 1848. Those of you that know a little European history will know this. And this is how Eco put words into his character Joly's mouth. Tyranny, you understand, has been achieved thanks to universal suffrage. The scoundrel, meaning Louis Napoleon, The scoundrel has carried out an authoritarian coup d'etat by appealing to the ignorant mob. This is a warning to us about the democracy of tomorrow. And this was not a fluke, because a couple of pages later, Umberto Eco puts similar language in the mouth of a different character, Godsche, and he says as follows: those who read books were already Republicans by nature, and those who supported the dictator were illiterate peasants who had been granted universal suffrage by the grace of God. Well, something like that, I think, is what happened on November 5th. We had a plurality of people, of the electorate, who actually went to the polls, who are essentially non-deep readers. Um, all the polling data and the exit polls show the split between uh, uh, people with higher educations, people and without, people in rural areas, mostly people in urban areas. There's a clear sociological divide in the United States that has gotten wider and wider in recent years. And this is pretty much, the populist coup that brought Trump to power. But there was a second coup, a coup within the coup, and this is what has created the tension in the administration's first 5 or 6 months, and it has affected the foreign policy portfolio very much as well. The second coup was made up of people like Elon Musk and Peter Thiel, who is the banker and the supporter of the vice president J.D. Vance, David Sachs, and several other people. Uh, and these are people who have been called, including by Steve Bannon, who hates these people. They've been called anarcho-libertarians. They've been called techno-feudalists. A woman named Carol Cadwalader used to write for The Guardian in Britain, has coined the term the broligarchy. An interesting neologism, the bros. So these are very wealthy tech oligarchs who have no particular devotion to any national idea. They are international citizens, or transnational citizens, and they are out basically to loot the commons with algorithms and whatever else they use. I mean, the companies we're talking about, Meta and Palantir and a variety of others, and of course Elon Musk with X and the space programs and all that, and Starlink. These are people, and Steve Bezos, Amazon. These are people with simply enormous amounts of money. Some of them are individually worth more than the entire GNPs of certain countries in the world, smaller countries. These are not populists. These are educated people. These are people who truck in ideas, although sometimes very extreme ideas. But they basically believe that the state, the American federal state, is in their way. It taxes, it regulates, it monitors, and they would prefer to be free from that. So what the so-called Doge was up to, it was characterized as to make the American government more efficient. All right, but that's not what it was really about at all. It was designed to emasculate the taxation and regulatory powers of the federal government, so that the broligarchy or the techno-feudalists could basically run wild and do whatever they wanted to. Now, in the beginning of the administration, I think within the first couple of weeks, you saw Elon Musk and his Doge guys, who had worked for him, before, sort of barge into the Treasury Department and take basically all the data from the IRS, all the Social Security data, and this sort of matches up with a program that Palantir is running for the Department of Defense, but running in general, call it the Panopticon. And this is an attempt to merge together big data fields in order to create essentially the potential to monitor every single person in the United States. That is to say, citizens of the United States. And one use of it is to monitor the identities and movements of people who are in the United States without legal residency rights. In other words, illegal aliens. So, if you remember, some of you may remember back in 2013 when the Edward Snowden affair took place. He sort of gave away the wiring diagram for the American IC, the intelligence community, and a lot of journalists who didn't know any better got this all wrong. I mean, they thought that the National Security Agency was reading everybody's email, as if they could give a damn about anybody's email. I mean, a lot of that stuff was simply nonsense. But what's going on right now is not nonsense. What's going on right now is something close to the real thing. And just to give you an idea, just how different and intrusive all this is. Palantir has very large contracts in the Department of Defense. This is a development that's been going on for almost 7 or 8 years. So it's not just in the Trump 2.0 administration, but just recently, um, uh, uh, one Palantir employee, I think two Palantir employees, one Meta employee, and one OpenAI employee were made suddenly lieutenant colonels in the U.S. Army. They were commissioned in the Army. These are four people with no military background and no military experience, but they have become officers in the U.S. Army because they are part of the shepherding process of infusing artificial intelligence in in the U.S. military, which is an interesting subject we don't have time to talk about. But this is just to give you some idea of the interface between the techno feudalists, so to speak. What they're trying to do is not make government more efficient. They're trying to get rid of the parts of the government they don't like and control the parts of the government that they think are profitable. A lot of people have described the Trump administration because of the role of the populists on the one side that got him elected, but then the anarcho-libertarians that really took over in the early months of the administration have described the Trump victory as a hostile takeover. In other words, in corporate raiders in the United States, not just in the United States, I mean, they take over a company, and one of the things that they typically do is they look at the structure of the company and they strip away all the assets that aren't making money. They either shut them down or they try to sell them, and they only keep the revenue-producing parts of the company, which they then try to maximize. The share price in stock markets, and they may either give themselves a lot of stocks if they think that's valuable, or they may try to sell that quickly or whatever. But if you look at how the Trump administration has approached so-called government reform, it kind of matches a hostile takeover. So any part of the U.S. government, of the federal government, especially the executive branch, that the president and his associates see as essentially wasting money, not having any revenue flow, they're trying to get rid of. And there are all sorts of reasons what they give for it. But for example, ordinarily, when a typical president is elected and he nominates people to head the various departments and agencies of the federal government, the assumption is that they go to these departments and agencies to make them work well, to fulfill their missions. But that is not what's been going on in the second Trump administration. For example, Linda McMahon, the wife of Vince McMahon, who was the head of the World Wrestling Federation, was nominated and confirmed to be a secretary of the Department of Education. But her job wasn't to make the Department of Education work better. Her job was to destroy it. All right. And Robert F. Kennedy became Secretary of Health and Human Services, and which of course controls the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, controls the National Institutes for Health, controls the Centers for CDC, Center for Disease Control. And what has he done? He's basically tried to basically destroy these institutions or whittle them down, whittle their budgets away so that they can't function effectively, because they don't make money, they spend money. All right. And the rationale has always been, well, the federal debt in the United States is trillions of dollars. It's way too high. It's a burden on our future generations. And if that were true, then Trump's great, beautiful bill that is now, moving from the House to the Senate, that bill, all the studies of that bill would show that they're really serious about debt reduction and about budget control, that the plan would reduce the national debt. But every single honest assessment of it shows that it would balloon the debt over the next 10 years. So that was never really the point. The point was to simply emasculate all the taxation and regulatory powers of the federal government. I'll stop there. Now, what kind of foreign policy? I mean, it goes with patrimonialism and an anarcho-libertarian attempt to basically create a free-for-all for looting both the domestic and the global commons. Well, American foreign policy since the end of the Second World War has been very unusual. One clever Scandinavian fellow, I forget his name right now, referred to the United States as an empire by invitation. Well, countries wanted to associate with the most powerful and the wealthiest country in the world after the Second World War. They wanted protection from dangers, both civil and from the Soviet Union, communist movements, and so on. I mean, everyone knows this story. And the United States basically assumed the role of a rule maker and a provider of common global security goods, at least for that part of the world that was not in the throes of the Soviet Union, or after 1948, the People's Republic of China and their associates. So that was the shape of the Cold War. And the United States was basically a status quo power, not culturally, but in terms of geopolitics. It formed a series of alliances, not just to deter the Soviet Union, but also to congeal regional groupings like NATO, which formed the basis for the European Union, and it sought the prosperity and the peace, basically, of the world. Sometimes American foreign policy was a little bit selfish, especially in the Western Hemisphere, but overall, it seems to me the world was better off for the steady hand and the consistency of American foreign policy after the second. Not that we didn't make mistakes; we made a lot of mistakes, but nevertheless, I think the policy overall was reasonably understood. It was reasonable. I mean, the idea was basically to do well by doing good, or to do good by doing well, however you want to look at it. It was a positive sum conception, in tandem with the Enlightenment principles of American government. Uh, 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 that's gone now. That's just gone. What we have today, as an adjunct to the patrimonialism of Trump's view of the presidency, is a return of mercantilism. I mean, this is not an isolationist foreign policy. It's a mercantilist foreign policy, and it's based on economics and trade, so long as it's seen to be trade that's advantageous to the United States. It's a zero-sum conception of trade, which David Ricardo would find very strange, and so would Joseph Schumpeter and all the other economists of the classical era. But this is, as I say, this is not um, anti-free trade. This is not anti anything. It's pre. It is pre. Um, you know, Bretton Woods, pre-GATT. This is the oldest conception of political economy going. I mean, a long, long time ago, before the Enlightenment, political power and economic power were always joined together. The first corporations were not private corporations; they were public corporations. How did Christopher Columbus get to America? Right, the Spanish court financed him. What was the Hudson Bay Company? What was the East India Company? Right, all of these were government financed corporations, and it wasn't until the true rise of liberalism in the original 19th century meaning of the word that you had this division between political power and economic power, and economic liberty, economic freedom. Uh, that's what's novel in history, not the old-fashioned, very tight ties between political power and economic power. It goes all the way back to the tales of Robin Hood, for that matter. So this is how American foreign policy has to be seen these days, as something very discontinuous from what's gone on before, and as something that is actually a throwback to a pre-Enlightenment way, at least in the West, pre-Enlightenment ways of thinking about these kinds of subjects. So let's now go directly to the Middle East. If you think about American policy in the Middle East after the Second World War, I mean, to simplify it somewhat, in the beginning of the policy, by the time you come to the Truman Doctrine, 1947, American foreign policy in the Middle East really had three aims. The first was to keep the Soviets out of the Middle East to the extent possible. The second was to keep the oil flowing for the benefit of the recovery and expansion of the world economy after the Second World War. And the third was to keep Israel safe. And this requires a comment. Israel was the only democracy in the Middle East in 1948 after it was created. But that's not the reason. That's not the only reason or the main reason why Americans took special interest in Israel. There's a deep stream of Judeo-philic sentiment in American Protestantism, and especially in American Anglo-Protestantism. It doesn't mean there hasn't been anti-Semitism in American history. There has, but for the most part, it's been overwhelmed by a philo-Semitic, dispensationalist Christian attitude toward all things Jewish and Judaism. I'm simplifying, but that's basically true. So America was thought of as, the new Israel. I mean, the Pilgrims and the original, religious dissenters who colonized New England, came to other parts, the Quakers who came to Pennsylvania, the central part of the country. And they always looked to Israel as a model and named their kids after biblical Hebrew names for the most part. And that's attenuated greatly over the years, but it's still there. And Israel's early path from 1948, really until 1981, until the first Likud government in Israel. Um, Not just American Jews, but American non-Jews saw Israel as a beacon of, the underdog doing well, integrating Jews from all over the world. I mean, it was a good story, right? And it was in movies, like Exodus, that movie with Paul Newman back, God knows, 1957 or whatever it was. Israel was very popular, and it still is. Again, not exactly the same way or to the same extent. The, the early American policy toward Israel was sort of standoffish. It wasn't until the Kennedy administration that the United States sold Israel a single weapon. All during the Eisenhower administration, 8 years, basically, there was an arms embargo, an American arms embargo on Israel, for fear of what the oil lobby would do, representing the interest of oil-rich countries, including Arab countries. So when people talk about in recent years, the Israeli lobby, the Jewish lobby, AIPAC, well, it's true. It's exercised a lot of influence, but people forget that in the early days there was no such thing, and it was the oil lobby that exercised more influence politically in this country than the Jewish lobby. But in any event, things changed over time, and other interests developed. For example, it became a critical part of American foreign policy to stem the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. And so, added on to the basic agenda, right, keep the Soviets out, the oil flowing, and Israel safe, was added the Middle Eastern part of a U.S. non-proliferation policy. In addition to that, after about 1973, after the October War, and then the step-by-step diplomacy organized by Henry Kissinger, and eventually the peace treaty between Israel and Egypt in 1979, creating that treaty and then trying to expand it between Israel and other countries. So the Arab-Israeli peace process. The Arab-Israeli peace process became a huge, almost continuous part of American foreign policy, starting in the early 1970s, and has continued almost without respite. And to some extent, there's some continuity here, even between the pre-Trump 2.0 period and the current period, although it looks very different if you look closely at it. In addition, the United States at various times sought regional security pacts, or at least alliances of some sort, sort of analogous to NATO and sort of analogous to the hub and spoke arrangements that the United States has in Asia. But those efforts to create, like CENTO or the Middle East Treaty Organization, things like that, didn't get very far in the early days because of divisions among the Arabs principally. Malcolm Kerr, who was at the American University in Cairo back in the day, wrote a wonderful book, famous book called The Arab Cold War, in which he described the bitter disputes and the intrigues and the espionage and so forth between the traditional Arab monarchies and the new revolutionary republics, many of whom drifted toward if not friendship, then associations with the Soviet Union. And so the ideological dimension of the Cold War got sort of interjected into the Middle East through what Kerr called the Arab Cold War. So navigating that the Arab Cold War, being friendly with the traditional monarchies, Jordan, Morocco, so on, and other states like Lebanon, and yet trying to limit the influence of the Soviet Union in Egypt, in Syria, and Iraq after 1958. So forth. That was those geopolitics. The Cold War interposed on top of Middle Eastern politics. That was the key sort of engine of reality that defined and shaped U.S. Middle East policy all throughout the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and into the 1980s. And then, of course, the Iranian Revolution in 1979 threw a new wrinkle into the whole thing. The entry of fundamentalist religion into the works, which before had been, monarchies versus modern nationalism. Now we had a third axis of a whole new kind of religious politics that American modernization theorists in the 1950s and 60s never even predicted. But that's what happened. And ever since 1979, 1980, and then 8 years of the war between Iran and Iraq, the role of Iran and the role of Islamic fundamentalism, and then in turn, the sectarian division between Sunni and Shia Islam and other smaller groups like the Alawis in Syria and the Druze and so forth, that has become far more prominent, as has the role of minorities within the Middle East, notably the Kurds, but others as well. So things have gotten much more complicated, and the politics have become multi-layered in a way that they didn't seem to be really, or not prominently anyway, in the first 25 or 30 years um, after the Second World War. And then, of course, we had after 9/11, after the end of the Cold War, and then we had September 11th, 2001, we had an emphasis in American policy on um, reconstruction of war-torn societies, problems again with proliferation, non-proliferation, which was part of the rationale for the war against Iraq and started in March 2003. Democracy promotion, in some cases, just trying to help, friendly and associated societies with the development of civil society. In other words, the agenda, simply the list of portfolios within American Middle East policy, kept expanding and kept changing and kept interacting with one another until it got really, really complicated. How did the religious politics of the Middle East intersect with peace process efforts? How did that come to play against the efforts of external powers, the Soviet Union until 1992, and China and others, the European Union? I mean, it was a really complicated little ball of wax trying to understand and trying to manage from an American foreign policy perspective, Middle East policy. And the point is, all of the bureaucracies, um, the National Security Council and the White House, but especially the State Department, the Defense Department, to some extent the Commerce Department, Treasury Department, certainly the way that the intelligence community arranged itself and used its budget, the way the United States military organized its forces, the Central Command, for example, for the Middle East, located in Tampa, Florida, was created at a certain point. So this very large agenda, mixed and complicated agenda of U.S. Middle East policy, sized and shaped the way that the government developed to handle all these issues, and the way that the government tried to coordinate itself to deal with these things and all the trade-offs they often involved was through something called the interagency. And what that means, if you don't know what that means, it's very simple. When you have one of these complex problems that involves economic and political and military and diplomatic aspects, in order to have the government reading from the same page of music and being coordinated, you have to coordinate all the various departments and all the various agencies and parts of departments and agencies that deal with this part of the world. So you'd have one lead agency, often the State Department, sometimes the Treasury Department, depending on the subject, and then people from different departments and agencies would meet on a regular basis. There'd be standing interagencies committees for as long as necessary to handle a perennial challenge. And when certain crises would occur, there would be special ad hoc interagency groups that would come together and try to deal with the problem. They would all report through the National Security Council to the president and his advisors. And that's the way it worked. Okay, so now when I say that American foreign policy has basically disappeared as we have understood it, what I mean is that this administration doesn't care about democracy promotion at all. It doesn't care about civil society growth in Muslim countries or in any country in the Middle East. It just doesn't care. It doesn't see that as part of the idea of government as a business. And the leader doesn't see that as part of the patrimonial responsibilities, unless, of course, the leader can parlay some of these relationships into financial profits for the country, but also for himself. Witness, for example, the acceptance by the president of a Qatari 747 airplane as a personal gift. I mean, this is simply unimaginable in any administration. This is called an emolument. It's against the law. But this is simply unimaginable in any other administration. But in this administration, it's just par for the course. Somebody wants to give you a 747 all decked out in gold, and all that, even though the thing is, talk about deferred maintenance. It's going to cost $150 billion to fix this airplane. But some of the Republicans and congressmen in Congress feel a little odd about this. But Trump wants to do it. He has a majority in Congress. The court won't stop him, so he does it. That's patrimonialism. That's seeing the government as a business for personal. I mean, they look at all the grifting that he's done. All right, the mem crypto coins, now with a watch. Now he's got a new cell phone thing that he's trying. This is something that no president in America, going back to George Washington, that no president in America would ever even imagine trying to use the office of the presidency for personalized grifting, right? So the whole thing is about business. You know, some of you probably know, back in the 20s, Calvin Coolidge said that the business of America is business, all right? But Donald Trump and his friends have taken this to an entirely new level. The business of the United States is my business, right? And I'm gonna. I mean, just look at Ukraine. Okay, so he gets a deal over rare earth minerals with Ukraine, and he figures, well, I've got my deal. I can move on now, and I don't give a damn what happens to these people. And that's pretty much what's happened to the policy. Same thing. Same thing was true in originally with the Gaza war. So what was Trump's original instinct? Well, you know, the United States comes in and just sticks itself in Gaza, and we turn it into a resort, like the Middle East Riviera, like Mar-e-Gaza. I mean, this is just preposterous. And again, maybe it's a great idea, you know, if you can pull it off. But no president in American history before now thinks that way, has ever thought that way. The idea of government as a public trust, he just doesn't understand that. Government is it's his patrimony. He can do with it whatever he wants, treats it like his personal property. And that is very discontinuous with the past. So he doesn't care about the traditional agenda of American Middle East policy. He wants the oil to grow, the oil to flow, but you know, if it didn't, he would probably try to take advantage of the fact that it didn't flow. He wants to drill in the United States and make America a far more aggressive exporter of hydrocarbons, regardless of the environmental implications. Um, he's really trying to run the government like a business, and anything that doesn't make money, it has to go. So they don't want to fund National Public Radio or NPR or what's the PBS, Public Broadcasting System. They got rid of USAID. There's no revenue flow from USAID. That's like charity to the MAGA types. They think it's like a welfare for other people. They hate that, right? Get rid of USAID. They got rid of the U.S. Institute for Peace, which is not a government. It's a 501c3, but it's funded exclusively by the Congress. I think about $53 million a year. So that's chump change in Washington. But the Dodge types raided it, all right? And they threw everybody out of the building. The incels who followed Dodge around went inside, smoked a lot of weed, drank a lot of beer, trashed the place, left it in a heap. When the U.S. Institute of Peace people got back in, there were rats running all over the building. I mean, this kind of reminded me in a very small way of the attack on the University of Salamanca in 1936. It was the reason of unreason, according, it's what Ortega y Gasset called it. These people didn't care to convince anybody. They just wanted to do whatever they could because they were stronger. So they just trashed the place. So this is something that we've never seen before. You know, mass people taking people off the. We've never seen anything like this before. So in foreign policy, you know, multilateralism, forget about it. I have a feeling that in early September, when the 80th UNGA session convenes in New York, in Turtle Bay, that the United States will announce its withdrawal from the United Nations. I think that's probably going to happen. So it's kind of ironic that when the president sacked Mike Waltz, ostensibly because of the signal indiscretion, where Jeffrey Goldberg of the Atlantic got secret information about it, the attacks on the Houthis. What did he do? What did the president do with Mike Waltz? He sent him to be ambassador to the United Nations, and I think that job's going to end for him in September. That's just a hunch. I don't have any inside information on that. That's just a hunch. And NATO, I mean, the United States has a reliable Article 5 guarantor to the European allies. That's gone, you know. Most of the bases we have in Europe, the United States has, are not really for Europe. Some of them are small, you know, have a small symbolic tripwire function, especially in Poland and in the Baltic states. But most of those bases are really there because they are very convenient way stations and prepositioned stock depots for contingencies outside of Europe, including mainly in the Middle East. but also in South Asia and sometimes even in Southeast Asia. So if those bases go away, which they will, I mean, why would the Europeans continue to pay offset payments for bases when don't even have their back? We don't promise them an Article 5 guarantee, and not just with respect to Ukraine, but with respect to any future contingency. Okay, I mean, the MAGA types really hate democratic Europe. They loathe them. They see these countries as examples of Karl Popper's open society. And what the MAGA types really want is the return of what some of them call the strong gods, nationalism, religion, stuff like that. There's been a critique of liberalism in the United States, various angles of critique, that liberalism is kind of weak soup, weak beer. You know, all of this toleration, all of this humility, all of this heterogeneity, all this multiculturalism. There's no core. There's nothing for anybody to really hang on or believe or form their identity from. People need stronger stuff than that. That's the argument, right? So, it's bring back religion. There are polls that have showed that the majority of Americans want the United States to be an officially Christian country, even though they know that would violate the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. They still want it. That's very popular these days. So religion, nationalism, some of that is ethnic nationalism. I mean, it's white nationalism. I mean, look what's going on right now. We have a new travel ban on. First, it was 12 countries. Now I think it's going to be 36 countries. And if you just look at which countries they are, and you don't see essentially foreign policy made by racial profiling, then you're not looking hard enough. All right, that's what it is. Or what happens when Volodymyr Zelensky comes into the Oval Office on February 28th, and you see Vance and the president basically harassing him, basically Jew baiting him, is what it was. And that to me looked like classical anti-Semitism. And then along comes Cyril Ramaphosa, the president of South Africa, a couple of weeks later. And what does Trump do? He claims that there's white genocide going on in South Africa. And he agrees with Trump to make a special exception to allow white South Africans to declare refugee status and come to the United States. I mean, this is simply incredible. Can you imagine any other president of the previous, I don't know, dozen presidents doing something like that? Doing something as overtly racist as that? Can you imagine what these people think of East Asians? Don't make me go there. Okay. Anyway, so you see this sort of gut attitude against sort of the core elite values of American domestic and foreign policy are all repudiated. They're repudiated by the populist core of the MAGA world, but they're also, for different reasons, they are looked askance at or repudiated also by the anarcho-libertarians. And let me just say before I go further, while the anarcho-libertarian types, the Elon Musk types, were in the ascendancy in the first couple of months, they kind of got a little bit far ahead on their skis. They did a lot of embarrassing things. They created a lot of chaos. They pissed people off. They started going after with the tariff stuff in April. Farmers and other people could see that this was going to hurt them, and that's a core constituency in a lot of rural counties in the United States. The vote in November 2024 was somewhere 80, 81, 82% Trump, and only what's left, 17, 16% Harris. I mean, those are very lopsided numbers. The popularity of the Democratic Party right now in the United States is 27%. And if you dice that up according to urban, suburban, and rural, what you find is most of the 27% that support the Democrats, not all of it, a lot of it is in urban areas and in suburban areas, more affluent areas, better educated people. But in rural counties in Missouri and Kentucky, you've got 81, 82, 84% pro-Trump. So a lot of the stuff that Dodge, like now with the Medicaid cuts, a lot of poor people in red states depend on Medicaid, not just elderly people, but a lot of people. So you're starting to get a blowback from Trump's populist constituency against the administration, and his popularity ratings have really tanked. After the inauguration, he was up about 4 points, something like that. Now he's underwater 14 points. His last popularity rating, according to the polls, was 38%. That's not very good for a president who's only who won an election really hard, and then just 6 months later his popularity ratings were 38%. A little bit of that is because people are upset about his policy toward Ukraine and Russia, but most of it is based on disappointments or surprise about domestic things. There's a case that's being followed very avidly in the United States, um, in a small town in Missouri, where a woman who came to the United States from Hong Kong about 20 years ago. Her Americanized name is Carol. Of course, she has a Chinese name, but everybody in Kennett, Missouri knows her as Carol. She was very well liked. She got married. She owns her own home. She's got 3 kids in public school. Everybody loves her, right? And the ICE people came along and snapped her up and threw her in jail because she never bothered to get a green card. She never bothered to legalize herself. The only law she ever broke was overstaying her visa. Overstaying her visa. That was it. That's the only law she's ever broke. The people of the town that she lived in have risen up in her support because they assumed that what Trump was talking about when he was talking about you know carnage from illegal immigrants were gang members from Central America, and they never imagined that he would go after just people like Carol. All right. But he claimed that he wanted to deport between 12 and 20 million people, including people like Carol. So when they started to do it, that was very unpopular. And that's why his approval ratings have tanked. And several things that have gone on lately, even with respect to the Iran-Israel fighting right now, uh, uh, some of Trump's decisions have been influenced by his concern with his popularity ratings. And that was caused mainly by the kind of weird, chaotic things that the anarcho-libertarians did in the first couple of months of the administration. And now he's gotten rid of Musk, and he's sort of tried to calm down some of the other anarcho-libertarians, and he's moved back now more toward the populist part of the coalition that elected him. But this is not stable. I mean, we will see where this will go. Now, to give you last thing I want to talk about is you can see how dramatically different the conception of policy in the Middle East is if you look at again the institutions that were shaped by the agenda of American Middle East policy all those decades. So, for example, right now the State Department is completely irrelevant to American foreign policy. It really doesn't matter. Marco Rubio is the Secretary of State, but the president thinks that that it's so unimportant that he's Secretary of State that he doesn't use State Department professionals for anything. So if he wants to send an envoy somewhere for some special purpose, he's been depending on Steve Witkoff, for example. It's been his envoy all over the place. It was his envoy to the Ukraine-Russia set to. But what foreign policy or diplomatic experience does Steve Witkoff have? He has none. He's a real estate mogul in New York City, a friend of Trump from real estate stuff. He has no diplomatic experience, and the Russians rolled him completely. I mean, here you have serious, long experienced and shrewd Russian diplomats, right? Just stringing him along, making him believe that there was some kind of formula that would lead the Russians to agree to a ceasefire in the war. They were never going to do that. They were never going to do that. And Witkoff just swallowed the Kool-Aid whole, and then went on the Tucker Carlson show and said, with no hint of irony, gosh, he didn't think it would be so difficult to arrange a ceasefire in this war. That the man doesn't know anything about it. And then even more dramatic, back in March, and this was Middle Eastern, Trump appointed a hostage envoy negotiator, and met a delegation from Hamas in Doha, in Qatar, without even forewarning the Israeli government that he was going to do that. Totally blindsided the Israelis. So there was a meeting between Hamas and American diplomats. And this envoy, his name is Adam Bullard, he comes out afterwards and does a press conference. And in the press conference, he seems to side with Hamas positions on the negotiations. And he even mixed up the definition of the word hostages. He seemed to say that Palestinians arrested for crimes in Israeli jails were the hostages, and not the Israelis who were kidnapped by Hamas on October 7th, 2023. I mean, it was one of the worst performances by a so-called American diplomat that I've ever seen. All right. and he was yanked out of there pretty fast. But who is this guy? All right, he's 45 years old. He's been in healthcare. His father's a physician. He's been in healthcare kind of business. He graduated from Wharton, University of Pennsylvania, just like Elon Musk and um, just like Donald Trump. And and I didn't graduate from Wharton, but I graduated from Penn. But anyway, um, he had no idea what he was doing. He had no idea what he was saying. Why would Donald Trump, right, trust these people who have no diplomatic experience, no understanding, no academic or any kind of practical understanding of the issues involved? Why would he send people like that out to do important jobs and ignore the whole strata of professionals in foreign service and civil service, people who actually know these issues for many years? Why would he rely on these kinds of people? Well, one of the reasons is because he doesn't trust any of the standing bureaucracies. He doesn't trust the civilians in the Defense Department. He's trying to shrink the state. They've eliminated DRL, which that's the agency, the Assistant Secretaryship for Democracy, Labor, and Human Rights. That's gone because they don't care about democracy, labor, or human rights. Right? Um, and so you see, so even the personnel, you see, when Marco Rubio has gone on trips to the Middle East, it used to be that when a Secretary of State would go on a trip like that, he'd take the Assistant Secretary for Near East and South Asia, NISA, that's what it's called in the U.S. government, or he would take the person on the National Security Council who is responsible for that area, or he might take two people from the NSC along with the State Department types for functional needs. I mean, if there was a political military issue to be hammered out, he would take the person who knows about. But they don't do that. They don't take the professionals with them when they travel. They take other people with them when they travel. It dawned on me about a day or two ago that I didn't even know who the Assistant Secretary of State for Near East and South Asia was, because in all the media reporting that we've seen over the past several months, whether it's about the Gaza war or whether it's about more recently the Iran-Iraq fighting, the Iran-Israel fighting, I never saw a name. I didn't even know the name of the person in policy planning in the State Department where I used to work, who's responsible for Middle East stuff or for Gulf stuff. I mean, just their names never come up in the media because they don't matter, because they don't even exist as far as the White House is concerned, and they simply have no function. I mean, they get paid and all that, and I don't know what they do over there, but they're not actually acting the party, acting out the policy. So I looked up the person who is the Assistant Secretary of State for Near East and South Asia, who you would think at a time like this would be very, very involved and very, very busy. Well, to my surprise, it's somebody I never heard of. It's a woman named Mora Nandar, who was the daughter of Iranian immigrants. So she speaks Farsi. I'm not sure she reads Farsi, but she speaks Farsi. But she has almost no diplomatic or foreign policy experience at all. She's a lawyer. In the first Trump administration, she was in the State Department in consular affairs, which is about as low as you can go in terms of important responsibilities. And she's not even 40 years old yet. She was in her early 30s then. Exactly how she hooked up with the Trump types, I have no idea. Also in the first term, one of the things that she did, if anybody can remember this, it would be surprising to me, but it's important. The United States has these radios. They have Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, Radio Marti, Radio Farda, which broadcasts in Farsi. We have the Middle East Broadcasting Network, right? That was set up after 9/11. And these radios are all now connected in something called the U.S. Agency for Global Media. And the guy who runs this is Ambassador Chester Crocker, very prominent senior American diplomat who's been an ambassador 6 times to Iraq and to Pakistan and other very important countries. So he's the head of the U.S. Agency for Global Media. And basically the administration and Nora Namdar worked for a guy named Michael Peck, who was nominated to be the head of this agency in the first Trump administration. He was nominated in 2018, but he didn't get confirmed until 2020, and he only had about 7 months on the job. And when he got to the radios, he basically tried to prove that they were guilty of waste and fraud and mismanagement, and that all they did was siphon through anti-American propaganda, and he caused a lot of heartburn, especially in Congress. Congress investigated him after the first Trump administration ended. Um, there was an investigation of Michael Peck, and the GAO, the Government Accounting Office, issued a 154-page report on his misdoings, his maldoings. And who was his right-hand woman at the time? Maura Nandar. She's mentioned 50 times in this report. And she was the compliance officer. Basically, she was the hatchet woman that went around trying to find waste, abuse, and anti-Americanism in the radios, so that for the purpose of shutting them down, basically. Uh, and now she is not Assistant Secretary of State for Near East and South Asia. She is acting Assistant Secretary of State for Near East and South Asia, because Trump doesn't like, he likes acting officials, because their legal sway is less if they're just acting. I don't think they're going to even try to confirm her. They're just going to leave her there, basically. But what she's doing now is essentially backing Carrie Lake from Arizona, who's been put in charge of the U.S. Agency for Global Media, and she is the one who stopped congressional funding flowing, illegally did that, flowing to the radios. And now the radios have been cut. 90% of their budget and staff have been laid off and destroyed over the past several months. And Carrie Lake, and along with Maura Nandar, have hired a group called the Ragnar Group, some of the same people that were associated with Michael Peck back in 2020, to investigate waste, corruption, fraud, and anti-Americanism in the radios. Okay, well, there really isn't any, but they're investigating it as a pretext for destroying the budget, cutting it down, and destroying the radios. Now, you would think that at a time like this, when the Iranian regime has cut off internet connectivity to the Iranian people, that having Radio Farda up and running would be a good thing to do, basically, for U.S. policy, if we had, sort of the traditional interests in mind of human rights and peace and stability and all that kind of stuff, right? But Radio Farda is basically barely functioning because more than 90% of its staff had to be let go because they had no money, because the money was illegally impounded. So there's an example, right? I mean, never even heard of these people. That's because they don't matter. So what you have in the administration, foreign policy, is you have these political appointees sitting on top of the relevant agencies for foreign policy. And that includes, of course, Rubio. But the president thinks that Rubio has so much time on his hands because the State Department doesn't matter, that he's now dual-hatted as national security advisor until they find somebody to replace him. And earlier, he was sent over to the National Archives after Trump fired the head of the National Archives. So he could do that too. He could do all these things because actually being Secretary of State doesn't matter to the White House. So these heads of these cabinet secretaries and all the political appointees, the Schedule C people, they may talk informally to themselves, and I'm sure they do. But there's very little connectivity vertically within these departments and agencies, from the political echelon on the top down to, in the case of the State Department, the Foreign Service officers and the Civil Service officers, who are the institutional memory of American foreign policy. They don't even talk to these people, right? They simply cut off, right? And so there is no interagency. There is no groups that join together to create a whole of government approaches to complex problems, because as far as the White House is concerned, those problems, they may be complex, but they're not important. They just don't care about them. So there's no interagency. And when these people travel, they don't take professionals from the NSC or the Defense Department or the IC or the State Department or the Treasury Department or they don't take them with them because they don't trust them. As far as they're concerned, they're part of the deep state, and they're trying to drive experienced people out of the government, and they are succeeding. There's a lot of early retirement and people just quitting all through the executive branch. And that's quite deliberate. They're just trying to triage them out, trying to get rid of them. And that's just part, it's like, and the result is that what the administration can do in domestic policy and in foreign policy, in terms of process, is they can destroy things. They can stop doing things that have been done, right? But it's very difficult for them, given the circumstances, for them to create anything new. So they can stop doing old stuff, but they can't manage so far to figure out how to actually do anything constructive, assuming that they have an idea for what they believe would be except tariffs, for example. I mean, and again, even the deportations of illegal aliens is a good example of a campaign promise. We're going to get rid of 12 million or 20 million people who don't have a right to be in the U.S. How many people has this administration actually deported? With due process, or more often than not without due process? How many? Fewer actually than the Obama administration did in a comparable period of time. Why is that? Because they don't have the people, they don't have the budgets, they just don't have the horses to do deportations on that kind of a scale. So what does Trump want to do instead? He wants to basically use the U.S. military to do that. We've seen this in Los Angeles lately. I'm sure many of you have seen footage. 'Cause that's illegal. That's a violation of a law from 1878 called Posse Comitatus. That's illegal. And so every time Trump decides he's going to do something a little unusual, he runs up against the law and he forces the courts, so far the lower courts, a few times the Supreme Court already, he forces the courts to tell him yes or no. And then he has to decide whether to do what the court says or just ignore it. And so there's some of this, some of that, has been going on, but this is going to come to a head eventually. Um, and the Supreme Court is going to have to weigh in on this eventually, and then we'll see what happens. And this will affect both, the domestic politics and also foreign policy. We'll see what happens. There have only been two times so far in American history where the Supreme Court laid down an order, told the president you can't do that. All right, and the president ignored them and did it anyway. First example was in 1832 with Andrew Jackson. It had to do with an obscure case in Georgia, but it led to the Trail of Tears. I mean, it led to essentially the genocide of Native Americans. So it wasn't a mere thing. And of course, there was a famous statement. Jackson said, well, Justice Marshall has made his decision. Let him enforce it. That's what President Jackson said. The second case of a president basically telling the Supreme Court to just, go shove it was Abraham Lincoln in 1861, suspension of habeas corpus, putting the mayor and the entire city council of Baltimore in Fort McHenry, basically locking them up. And the Supreme Court said, you can't do that. And Lincoln said, yes, I can. Make me. So we have two very different kind of examples from American history, but I'm pretty sure that between now and the midterms, or maybe a little later, we're going to see a third. We're going to see the Supreme Court tell Donald Trump what he can't do, and Donald Trump is going to have to decide, either tell the Supreme Court to go shove it or capitulate to the Supreme Court. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen. Either one could happen. And that's going to affect the entire administration, certainly going to affect domestic policy, but it will also affect a lot of the things that the president's been trying to do in foreign policy, like this blatantly illegal travel ban. So that's really what I wanted to tell you, and I'll stop here. This is a very strange place that American foreign policy is in, and it's a very strange place that American Middle East policy is in. And but one more thing. So, what has been the policy of the president and the administration since Friday and before Friday? There were negotiations with Iran in Oman, and it's very ironic because in 2015 the Obama administration negotiated the nuclear deal with Iran. It was very imperfect, but it was probably better than nothing. And in May 2018, Trump unilaterally walked out of it. And what that did was that freed up the Iranians to increase their efforts to enrich uranium and do the other things necessary to build a nuclear weapon that they would have had more trouble doing if the United States had stayed in the agreement, probably. But Trump left the agreement, and then something else happened that was very unusual for probably maybe with dealing with the Iranians and the Iranian nuclear program really since the beginning, because the program began under the Shah. It wasn't started by the Islamic Republic, but it's grown with time. It's become more sophisticated with time, become more technically competent with time, and it had always been it's been understood for many administrations, going back at least 25 years, that if the Iranian program ever reached the point of a breakout where it could threaten the existence of the state of Israel, not to mention other neighbors, that the United States would partner with Israel in preventing that kind of thing from happening. And that's been true in Democratic and Republican administrations with no break throughout. until we come to Donald Trump. Because, again, it's not an isolationist administration. It's a mercantilist administration. What does stopping an Iranian nuclear program have to do with trade, really? It doesn't have much to do with trade. I mean, why was Trump's first trip abroad, first term and this term, to Saudi Arabia and the Emirates and Qatar? Why did he go there first? That's because that's where the money is. That's why he went there. um, so Israel doesn't matter. Turkey, a NATO ally, doesn't matter. He didn't go there. He went to these. That's how he thinks. So, the problem of nuclear proliferation, the problem of the Iranian nuclear program, he doesn't lose any sleep over this. This has nothing to do with money. He doesn't care about it particularly. He cares about the political aura that is associated with his decisions on it, and he cares about his domestic support among Jews, which is important to him. But he doesn't really care about the subject itself. He just cares about the emanations. So anyway, it's been hard to figure out. Trump basically said to the Israelis, we're not going to join you. If you attack Iran, we're not going to join you. You're going to do it all by yourself. Now, what does that do to the Israelis? The Israelis are thinking, if we have the United States as a partner, and we have American naval air power, and we have American land-based air power, and so forth, that's a lot of airplanes, and we could do the mission that we want to do probably in one major strike, or maybe a little more. But if we have to do it by ourselves, we don't have as many planes as the Americans. We don't have the big planes and the bunker busters. We don't have a B-2 like the United States does. That means we're going to have to do this. We're going to have to do the first Friday's attack was 4 waves. So 200 planes attacking 100 targets, and then again, and then again, and then again. So in other words, the threshold of when Iranian progress becomes too much progress depends on whether the Israelis have the United States as a partner in putting a stop to it or not. If they don't have the United States, if Trump says he won't participate, that advances the date, that advances the timeline, the threshold that Israel has to act before it can't act anymore, before it's just too late. But that's not the case in this. But I think also the negotiations with Qatar. Now, the public position has been of the American position with regard to Iran. It's just like the Israeli position. You may not enrich any uranium. You may not enrich any uranium, and you have to turn over the 400 kilograms of uranium you've already enriched. That's the public position. But I don't think the Israelis bought it, right? I mean, they've seen what we're calling now in the United States the taco, right? Trump always backs down. We saw it with the Houthis, the attack on the Houthis. We saw it with the tariffs. The Israelis simply do not trust that anything Trump says means anything. And so from the Israeli point of view, if there had been another agreement signed, if the pens had been unsheathed and the Iranians and the Americans had signed the dotted line and the Europeans, there might have been a new nuclear deal, despite the public position, right? That was as bad as or worse than the one from 2015 that the Obama administration put together. And if that had happened, then the stigma of any Israeli attack after that agreement was signed, the diplomatic and political stigma would have fallen smack in the face of Jerusalem. So I think the timing of the decision was nothing to do really with how close the Iranians were to a nuclear breakout. People can disagree about that. And it had nothing to do with the IAE condemnation of Iran. It had to do with the fear that the Trump administration would rush into a deal with Iran that would really, really crimp both the diplomatic and the military aspects of any attack that the Israelis felt they would have to mount. That, I think, is the most important factor that determined the timing. But since then, I mean, Trump has been like a weather vane. He goes to the G7. He won't sign the document that everybody wants him to sign, talking about a ceasefire, because then he says, "No, we don't want a ceasefire. We want a big deal, a big arrangement between the Israelis and the Iranians." And the Israeli attack, I can use the Israeli attack to pressure the Iranians to sign a document that they heretofore refused to sign. So you don't know if this is coercive diplomacy. You don't know if he's trying to use the Israeli strike to get a deal with the Iranians, or if he really doesn't care or will walk away, or if he'll join the attack. Vice President Vance suggested that president is considering actually joining the attack, which simply means sending the B-2 with the big Moab bomb to Fordo and destroying that last uranium. We don't know. Every time Trump opens his mouth, he says something a little bit different. And there's nobody else in the administration who can speak for him, because if he doesn't know his own mind, really, how can anybody else know it? So this is the deinstitutionalized, strange, patrimonialized, mercantilist example of the foreign policy, nature of this administration. You can see it just in the past 3 days with weather vane Trump saying 4 different things about what U.S. policy is in this war. And I'll stop there.
Adam, yeah, thanks. All right, we're gonna go straight to Q&A because I think we've only got about 20 minutes for Q&A. So we have
Rudd.
we have a few questions. Few questions here. So right, sort of one is right, sort of a broad question about right, sort of really where will Trump go from here, and sort of the U.S. both in right, sort of the short, medium, and longer term. And then we have another question about since the U.S. is now a net energy exporter, right? So right, sort of would this then lessen right, sort of the interest or the incentive for the Trump administration to right, sort of safeguard right, sort of keeping the oil flowing as it's one of the key objectives of U.S. strategy, right? Especially if this is going to put pressure on China, which has grown right, sort of highly dependent on right, sort of sanction and also Middle East oil.
Right. Well, let me take the first question is unanswerable. I mean, nobody can really say for sure where Trump is going with respect to Middle East policy or any other policy, because I don't think he knows where he's going. He doesn't actually have ideas. He has emotional tics, and they don't last long. His capacity to focus attention on any one thing, especially if he's not particularly interested in it, is short. So when things change in the world and new information is presented to him, he reacts in the moment, and he reacts most of the time in terms of how whatever he does will make him look politically. So he doesn't really focus on the issues. He focuses on what a decision would mean in terms of the way he thinks of it, ratings. All right. So this is not just a disinstitutionalized foreign policy apparatus. It's a highly personalized one, and it's a highly personalized one with somebody who's 79 years old and doesn't read. I mean, I don't know if you saw the article, if the people in the audience saw the article, but because the president doesn't like to read, because he doesn't read, his briefings are now being created along the lines of Fox News broadcasts. He watches TV. That's what he watches, screens. That's what he does. So now, because he hasn't been absorbing the briefings, it's been pretty obvious to people that are close to him. Now the briefings are being done as though it were a Fox TV newscast. Right? Just think about what that means. Now, I remember his first Secretary of State in the first administration, Rex Tillerson, who was an Exxon, senior Exxon executive. He was the first Secretary of State. He didn't last very long in the administration because what Tillerson was trying to do was basically, sort of the standard normal stuff. And Trump wasn't interested in it, and he didn't understand the briefings. So after Tillerson left the administration, he was pretty irritated by the way he was treated, and he called the president a moron. It was unbriefable. All right. Well, things have just gotten worse, so that now he's not even given papers to read. It's a TV thing. That's his briefings, and he doesn't even ask for briefings from the intelligence community. I don't think he's seen Tulsi Gabbard once in the last 6 months. Who knows what's going on over there? I know what's going on at NSA after General Hoff was fired by Laura Loomer, basically. I mean, this is just bizarre what's going on. So nobody can predict what's going to happen. Again, you can read the tics in the body language. You have to see who's on top in the coalition, the political coalition. Is it the anarcho-libertarians who don't want any war, right? Or is it some of the traditional types like Bridge Colby when it comes to Asia? I mean, Drew Thompson did a good paper for RSIS a couple of weeks ago, in which he showed very vividly the three sort of groups in Asia policy with very different views: defend Taiwan, not defend Taiwan; care about the geopolitics, not care about the geopolitics; care only about the economic technical side. Three different groups inside the government uh, uh, are split over how to deal with Asia. All right, East Asia, mainly East Asia, and the president's view, we don't know. I mean, he certainly most of the time when asked, he's well, you don't defend Taiwan. That's in China's sphere of influence. This is 19th century sphere of influence conception of great power relations. So Ukraine is in the Russian sphere. We don't mess with them. Taiwan is in the Chinese sphere. If the Chinese decide they want to take Taiwan, we're not going to stop. That's the president's way of thinking. That means they leave us free. They leave the United States free to, I don't know, ravage Canada and take Greenland. I mean, this is just kind of crazy stuff. That's how he thinks. That's how the MAGA crowd thinks. They don't really know anything about these subjects, and they have a zero-sum, pre-Enlightenment view of how these things work. So you can kind of surround where they're thinking and where they're going, but predicting anything more specific than that, I don't think it's possible. I really don't. Now, the second question, good question, very interesting question. Yeah, Trump is trying to make the United States a much more important hydrocarbon energy exporter, and he's doing it for the money, basically. But that's not all. He also wants the United States, in conjunction with Palantir and other large corporations, to be at the very, very center of the economic aspects of artificial intelligence. And that's one of the reasons he went to Saudi Arabia, because MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince, wants to turn Saudi Arabia into the international center of artificial intelligence corporate developments with the help of other countries. But they've got the money to do this, right? And they think if they cite it to Saudi Arabia, that'll make Saudi Arabia, a real kingmaker. But I do think if there are interruptions major interruptions in the flow of oil out of the Gulf, and if Lloyd's of London transport rates go sky high and the price of oil goes sky high, all right, I mean, Trump will love that, because that'll make American exports lots more valuable. I mean, one of the reasons he likes tariffs is really very simple. When foreign countries pay tariffs, they pay it to the U.S. Treasury, just like excise taxes before the income tax amendment in 1916. He sees it as a moneymaker. This is how he thinks. I mean, he's the head of a large organization, and the only large organization he's ever been head of before is a for-profit business. So he thinks the government should be a for-profit business, and he's the CEO. That's how he thinks. So if he can see a positive revenue flow from anything he does, that appeals to him. And if he thinks he's just spending money, that doesn't appeal to him. That's how he thinks about AI and all these things. So, and that's how he thinks about oil and gas. That's how he thinks about it. So, yeah, the Chinese could have invested a whole lot of dependency in Middle Eastern oil only to find themselves in trouble. It's possible. But there are ironies here. Now, for example, take Saudi Arabia. One of the things that Trump was wanting to do was expand the Abraham Accords and get Saudi Arabia to normalize relations with Israel. But the real reason for that was the common fear of Iranian power. Now that Israel has basically defenestrated the Iranian military, the Saudi incentive for normalizing relations with Israel has decreased. Right? Why pay a price to associate with Israel when the job was just done for free? So if you do a net assessment of what's happening right now, there are a whole lot of stuff. There's a whole lot of stuff just jumping around, bouncing around in the air. I mean, this war right now is going to reset a whole lot of relationships. I mean, Iran, you count the maritime boundaries, Iran borders 12 countries. Israel borders, 4. This is really going to, change calculations and expectations throughout the region. And the question is right. It's going to affect economics. Absolutely. Is it going to make the region as a whole, generically less stable? Is it going to touch off other forms of violence and wars? Nobody knows. I tend to be I tend to be skeptical that it will. I don't see, you know, uh, all hell breaking loose right now. Um, all hell already broke loose. Hezbollah, the fall of the Assad regime in Syria. There's already been a lot of disruption. Um, I don't necessarily see this war triggering peripheral conflict, but if it does, it will certainly have major economic effects, and it could affect China deleteriously. It could.
Thanks, Adam. We have sort of time for one last question, which is about sort of the phenomenon that you mentioned about earlier about right sort of Israel's declining level of trust in Trump, right?
Mhm.
So it's that's personalized, but sort of how long do you think, or to what extent will that, sort of distrust of Trump personally translate into a distrust of the US more generally?
That's a great question. Uh, it kind of all depends on what. Well, it'll start depending on what happens in November 2026 with the midterms. If the and this is really a potential uh, event horizon. A lot of Democrats right now think that Trump is so unpopular that the Democrats are going to do great in the midterms, take back the Senate, maybe take back the House, and that will stop a lot of this madness. But people who think that are overly optimistic for two reasons. One, they're assuming that in red states there will be free and fair elections. I don't know. I mean, the governor of Missouri just declared, just nationalized the guard. I mean, just activated the Missouri National Guard to protect against riots. That's just intimidating protesters. That's an authoritarian move. If the governor of a state like that can do that, he can certainly affect the way that an election runs in in uh, in, in November 2026. The second thing is that even if the Democrats do very well, uh, people assume, well, they'll just take their seats as usual. But I don't think that's very likely. I think what we're going to see, we'll see if that happens. We'll see a Stop the Steal 3.0 now directed toward the state level, and we'll see the physical intimidation of election officials and judges, and we may even see more political violence of the horrible sort that we saw in Minnesota a few days ago. I think that's very likely. I think the midterms are going to bring a good deal of political violence because Americans are living in a surrealistic cloud right now for reasons we don't have time to talk about. So if those things happen in 2026 and it throws into question uh, the viability of the Constitution itself, all right, then it's very hard to look past Donald Trump. It's very hard to see what happens in 2028. It's very hard to see how the Democrats, with a 27% approval rating right now, how they restabilize the United States as we have known it. Uh, so I mean, I don't want to give people bad dreams or anything, but I think we're looking. I mean, we're all Friedrich Nietzsche right now, and we're looking into an abyss as far as the American future is concerned. And anybody who claims to know what's going to happen is either a liar or a fool, and I wouldn't believe him. All right, I don't know what's going to happen. Um, so, that's a great question, precisely because it can't be answered.
Thanks, Adam. So I would like to use my sort of moderator's privilege to ask you the final question here is right, sort of, what we do see right now is some elements of the Trump coalition, whether you want to call it right, sort of the MAGA faction or the America First faction, that is putting up really stiff opposition to any possible American intervention in the Israel Iran
Yeah,
conflict right now. I mean, you see right, sort of, Tucker Carlson really coming out and being
yeah,
the spokesperson
yeah.
for right right sort of non-intervention, and we also see polls showing that there is very quite little appetite in the American public for American intervention uh, in the conflict.
That's right. Yeah, I think that's right. I think whereas the policy of the administration and led by the anarcho-libertarian types, right, is mercantilist. There is a deep isolationist core in the populist sector, and of course, there's a bad taste in the mouths of a lot of people just for the Middle East, because we fought wars in Afghanistan that did not succeed. We fought a war in Iraq that did not produce some results that we wanted, but made a huge mess. And so there's a strong antipathy toward doing things like that again. So Trump still has the ability, if he really feels it necessary, to use force, but he himself is just risk averse. All bullies are like that. All bullies inside are cowards and they're risk averse, and he's a great example of it at the level of a 9-year-old mentality. So I don't think he's going to join this fighting, and it will partly be because it will reduce his popularity still further. This time among the core of his MAGA tribal coalition, his affinity group. I think he knows he's in political trouble. I mean, he can read numbers, he can read the polls, and and again, he doesn't really have reliable advisors who can think for him because he has so dominated the inner circle of the administration. I mean, he has acolytes like Stephen Miller, right, and even Bannon, but he doesn't. There's no Bernard Baruch near him. There's no Dean Acheson. There's nobody. There's nobody of that. There's no Henry Kissinger. There's nobody of genuine intellectual policy caliber and experience who can come to him and say, "Now, sir, understand it this way." There's no one like that. So he has to depend on himself, right? And that's a very thin reed, very thin.
Okay, thank you. On that very optimistic note, right? Sort of, I'm gonna have to call, right? Sort of the webinar in a close. Ladies and gentlemen, right? Sort of, thank you once again for attending the RSIS webinar, right? Sort of, where is U.S. Middle East policy headed by Dr. Adam Garfinkle, right? Sort of, thank you, Adam, again for a wonderful, enlightening webinar, right? Ladies and gentlemen, thank you again, right? And enjoy your day.